Now, a few misconceptions. Council has not been asked to find more capacity by the IHP. The IHP on the 25th of February of 2050 noted that conflicting evidence had been received on how to estimate developable supply of dwellings and asked for an expert group to advise the IHP on capacity versus demand. Dr. Fairgrave, a council witness, has confirmed in his evidence to the IHP there is more than adequate capacity to 2026 and well beyond. This is council's own evidence filed with the IHP as part of its case. Lastly, withdrawal of the out-of-scope changes will have little or no effect on the pre-1944 heritage overlay, as the overlay takes precedence over the underlying zone. Suggestions have been made that council could reclassify out-of-scope changes as in-scope based on a few generic submissions. Councillors need to know that this is an even worse abuse of the process. It would be regarded by the public as even more deceitful and should be beneath the dignity of the council. It will result in an even greater public backlash, as affected residents would still not have had any opportunity to make submissions on the specific changes affecting them. And lastly, the IHP should be allowed to get on with considering the submissions lodged and making its recommendations to council. Asking the IHP to consider nearly 30,000 new out-of-scope zoning changes would dramatically increase the workload of the IHP. It is in Auckland's best interest for the PAUP to be made operative as soon as possible. Should council feel in the future that further intensification is necessary, council can then undertake the necessary neighbourhood area studies, consult with residents and bring down planning changes. That is the proper way forward.
Good. Thank you, Richard.
If council votes to keep the out-of-scope changes and leave it to the IHP to sort out the problem, or worse still, make them in scope, it will alienate a significant proportion of Auckland residents, and councillors will be remembered for their failure to act. Thank you. I have with me Professor Palmer, and either he or I are happy to answer questions.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Right. Questions, councillors.
Yes.
Councillor Linda.
Thank you for your submission. Councillor Fletcher asked to get independent legal advice for us because she wanted a different advice from what we'd had, I gather, or another view. And so it came back to say that because I know that this is about not having a voice, and that's what you've said. And the legal advice said that it's absolutely possible for anybody in this room who wants to join the process to join a current submitter. And as 2040 is a current submitter, would you be willing for all these people to join your opportunity to speak so that they could have a voice?
No. There's multiple issues with that. Firstly, Auckland 2040 is not a submitter in relation to any of the out-of-scope zoning changes by definition. They are out of scope. So we have no right to make submissions on the out-of-scope submissions, even though the IHP has said they'll hear us. Secondly, it would be presumptuous of us in the extreme to suggest that we can speak on behalf of every single area of residence and every single area in Auckland. We can't. So no, we have no ability as an organisation or resources to contribute to a discussion on the out-of-scope issues when it comes down to considering the individual merit of them.
Okay. I just reserve, when it's the time for questions, Mr. Chairman, that we just park a question for staff around whether current submitters can submit on all these proposed changes. Thank you,
so what I'm proposing to do, Councillor Linda, just a minute, Richard. What I'm proposing to do is, once we are through the various public submissions, is basically to bring the officers back in. I have 2 or 3 questions to ask of them myself, and then we'll be able to get into the mahi. Councillor Mike.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Professor, in your long experience, is there any precedent for such a major change to what once would have been called Town and Country Planning or Resource Management Act planning? In your experience, is there any precedent for this sort of change, out of scope change?
Well, as indicated, under the normal RMA procedure and as adapted for this special one-off process, there's provision for a plan variation. And these changes are very significant. They're not just tweaking small things. And normally you'd expect it to be done as a plan variation. It's not being done here, as mentioned by the chairman, because that would carry the time over another year. And although technically, and I say this considering what was said earlier, there is provision in the Act for another year to be added to the process, the panel doesn't seem to want this to happen, and I don't think the council wants it to happen. So what is really occurring is this major change is being slipped in, I think, inappropriately, as just a matter of evidence, whereas that evidence is very substantial and significant. It is essentially a variation of that proposed unitary plan. And the whole concept is that when a council proposes a plan, that's what it has in mind, and it sticks with it and runs with it, doesn't sort of change the rules halfway through.
All right, okay, so there have been two questions and two very good answers.
Point of order.
Thank you very much.
Mr Chairman, it was suggested by the councillor that there was some motivation in my seeking independent legal advice. I've taken some offence at that. I think on such a significant planning change for Auckland, it would seem only fair and reasonable that we had independent contestable advice, and that has been very difficult to get right the way through the last 4 years, I have found. I don't have predetermination on this issue, and I have not sought independent legal advice simply to have something prepared that is perhaps, as suggested by the councillor, of another nature. So I would like her to apologise and for that to be withdrawn.
Councillor Fletcher.
There's a memo.
Actually,
There's a memo from him.
I wouldn't have asked you to apologise. It was quite frankly a reasonable comment. And we are getting a lot of legal opinions. And Dr. Ken, it's great to have yours. Thank you very much. You've been an outstanding contributor to local government in New Zealand, and we really value your views. Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And no doubt we'll see a lot more of you.
I did have a question, Mr Mayor.
No, I've said two. Thank you very much, Wayne. Right. Now, we're having... Now we'll move to Don Stock, who's the chair of the Mission Bay Koe Residents Association. Don.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to have some public input into this meeting. We do appreciate the way that you have reacted to some pretty strong public opinion out there, so thank you for the opportunity. As you've said, I'm the chair of the Mission Bay Koe Marama Residents Association, so I represent that group. I'm also here today with my speaking time representing the other residents associations of the area, which cover Auraki and St Heliers, Glendowie, Remuera, and also the Koe Neighbourhood Group represented by Jen Duda. And it's disappointing to have to represent all those groups because they were all turned down for speaking time, which is part of the problem that we see with the consultation process. I was one of the organisers, along with these other people, of the public meeting that perhaps set all this in motion. And so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of feedback of what we learnt there. We learnt that there was some very strong opinion, not always productive, I will say, and some diverse opinions. But we had about 700 people there on the night. They were very vocal. We received 609 written submissions from the attendees after the event, and we asked them to answer various questions. We had between 3 and 6 people that supported the council approach out of that 609 submissions. So if you're wondering which way the tide went, that was pretty obvious. So what are the issues? The issues really, foremost and almost exclusively, is about the process. Yes, we all have divergent views perhaps about what is good or bad about the plans that have been proposed, but that's not really the point. It's not the point whether we should be intensifying this or having 3-level or whatever. The point is that there have been a very, very large number of people that are going to have their lives changed for decades to come, and they have been excluded from any consultation in the process. Not only that, but the council's gone further. The council has appeared to have been deliberately secretive over this. Firstly, you seem to have hid the fact that there were any changes coming out until they were leaked to the Herald, and then they were published. And then they were taken off the website once we set up our public meeting, and they couldn't be found again. We had to find them on the Independent Hearings Panel website. Page 367 out of a 530-page document is where the maps are, by the way. You know, you expect people to find that? That's not public consultation. Then we hear that there were motions put in the Unitary Plan Committee that would have actually notified affected people, but no, that was voted down. You didn't want to tell people about this. I just find this incredible that you people can actually sit here and debate it. It seems so obvious to me that you've just made a mistake and you need to own up to it and get rid of it.
Here, here.
So we've heard today from staff that there's only about 14% of properties in Auckland that are changed by the out-of-scope changes. And that's an effort to minimise the scope of the problem and perhaps mean that this backdoor methodology might be more applicable. But I'm here to tell you that in the areas that I represent, we have had about 80% of the properties in Mission Bay have changed, about 60% of the properties in Ōrākei, about 80% of the properties in Glendowie, and collectively, between these groups, mainly sitting at this table, we represent about 40% of the out-of-scope changes which have been presented. These are not affecting only a small number of people. This is not tidying up loose ends. This is a big deal. And so what's the impact of the change? Are they just trivial changes to a lot of people? Well, no. This is an opportunity for the entire suburbs to have their character changed. At the moment, they are suburban character. And in the future, they will be zoned so that they will be 3-storey, and that most likely means apartments. Now, you can argue black and blue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's irrelevant. You cannot argue that that is a trivial change. So, we've established lots of people affected, major change. Where's the representation? Where's the ability to submit on it? Zippo. That's obviously a massive breach of natural justice. You can't argue against that. Some of you, I've written to each of you councillors here, some of you have come back saying, well, actually, the decision hasn't been made yet, it goes to the IHP. We've heard that again today. Just think to yourselves, tell me now, where is the chance for any public input to the process?
Super.
There is none. That is atrocious. Let me just carry on just a couple of quick things to finish off. We don't need the additional capacity. You've heard the evidence. We've got plenty of capacity in the notified PALP as it has been modified by public consultation. Public consultation is good. It's improved the original notified plan. Why throw that out the door and embark on a parallel process now? Housing affordability. I thought the speaker a couple before for the community housing, Aotearoa, was actually supporting us. If you want cheaper houses, I can't see how creating more 3-storey buildings in Mission Bay are actually going to achieve that.
That's right.
The whole out-of-zone component has been to add extra capacity. Surely if you want to improve housing affordability, you add that capacity in an area where you're going to get cheaper places. Every 3-storey development in Mission Bay in recent times where it is allowed has resulted in luxury apartments, large size, expensive land, $2 million plus price tags.
Don.
Yes,
can
I'll
we
wrap it
just-
up now.
Good man.
This is not really the point, but the unfair concentration of intensification. There are just a handful of suburbs. Auckland has about 200 suburbs. 8 of them have 70% of the intensification. Where are the reasons for that? Well, we've got the reasons laid out in evidence, but it's around proximity to town centres and transport and so forth, but that could apply anywhere. It doesn't mean to say that you put it in the high value areas, but stuck in the council evidence is a clue. It's basically saying the potential capacity will not be turned into real numbers of dwellings unless developers are actually financially motivated to get in and do something. So therefore, to get the best number of new dwellings, we should go to the places where developers should make the most money, and it would appear you believe that's in the high value areas. I disagree that that's the best criteria for deciding where you should intensify. So to summarise, we don't need it. It exacerbates housing affordability issues. It imposes a disproportionate burden on some suburbs. It requires an undemocratic process to get it pushed through. Why are we doing it?
All right, Don, thank you. Very, very good. Right, are there questions of Don? Councillor Wayne.
Yeah, I'll just ask a question, and it really goes to affordability. I'd make the assumption that when you upzone, you increase the value of the underlying land.
Yes.
Because you can do more with it. It follows that you're actually going to have construction on that land that's probably going to be more expensive. That means that it's probably going to be more expensive both to buy and also to rent, which doesn't do anything for affordability of houses or rentals. And if you take it further and you expand this across Auckland, all you're doing is dramatically escalating the price of land, dramatically escalating often what goes on the land, and making the whole city more unaffordable. And I'd just invite your comment on that, because we haven't heard much around that.
I guess my
Look, you might struggle with the question there, Don.
It's a simple question,
We
Mr.
get used
Chairman.
to these sort of statements. Councillor Wayne, it wasn't, so we'll just ask for a question, please. No,
Simple
I know.
question.
So are there any actual questions of Don?
Well, mine was a question.
No.
I'm happy to answer it, actually.
Well, you go for it, Don.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what happens. It's not rocket science. I cannot fathom. You talked about the credentials of council staff that have been here for a very long time and have incredible expertise. I can't understand how they could conceive that this is a solution to housing affordability issues by actually intensifying Aoraki, Mission Bay, Kohi, Marama, St Heliers, Glendowie, Takapuna. I'm flabbergasted.
Councillor Cam.
Oh, thank you, Don. These, quote, nominal changes in the blue in the area that you represent, do you believe that the existing transport and underground infrastructure could cope with this degree of upzoning if it was ever realised?